What is up, guys? This is Weasel for PokerWeasel.com. Welcome to this series, Fundamental Theorems of Poker. Part 1 is going to be a short introduction regarding what you can expect in this series. We are going to be considering the fundamental principles which tie poker together. Without these principles, you won't last very long in the world of poker. And if we can generate just a basic understanding of these important fundamental principles, we'll find that our success in poker is greatly accelerated. So we'll start right at the basics with value betting, which is a key component to any successful poker strategy. So what is a value bet? When do we use it? What are some of the associated formulas that surround this particular principle? We'll then consider the same for bluffing. Once again, this is an integral part of any winning poker player's strategy. What is bluffing? How can we use it? What are some of the associated mathematical formulas which govern this principle? We'll then move on to semi-bluffing. And these three principles constitute the absolute basics: value betting, bluffing, semi-bluffing. Once we have a working understanding of these particular plays, we'll then move on to some slightly more advanced concepts. We'll move on to the topic of flawed terminology. We'll discuss some of the limitations of thinking in terms of value bet, bluff, and semi-bluff. While these may make inherent sense to our brains, they don't necessarily make inherent mathematical sense as a logical way of thinking about poker. We'll explain exactly what we mean by this. We'll also talk about how we can transcend some of the limitations of the flawed terminology which we are forced to use. Once we have an understanding of the limitations of flawed terminology, once we begin to understand that there are types of bets that occur between value betting and bluffing, there are types of bluffs that occur between bluffing and semi-bluffing, there are types of bets which don't really categorize very well into any of the three listed categories, we can then start talking about other reasons for betting. For example, we'll touch on the topic of protection betting. This is absolutely crucial part of winning play, yet it's something that's commonly misunderstood by many players. In fact, one of the absolute biggest leaks in lower limit games is that players are routinely allowing their opponent huge amounts of free equity. We're going to talk about how we can prevent this from happening, understanding when and where we can make bets for protection. Also, we'll consider how our decision to make protection bets can effectively transcend the boundaries of optimal play. Sometimes players are highly limited by the shackles of what they think is correct in theory, rather than what is best in practice. A common example of this might be to seriously overvalue showdown value and be worried about betting too frequently in a certain spot. But in practice, it won't be necessary to do this because our opponents are making such big mistakes when playing against us. We can get away with doing a huge amount that we shouldn't be able to get away with in theory. And protection bet often falls into this category. There are many spots we can protection bet, which perhaps you did not even think about before. And there are also many protection bet spots where it's going to be completely incorrect in theory to make a protection bet, but since our opponent cannot effectively punish this or does not do this in practice, we can get away with routinely denying our opponent huge amounts of the equity that he should be able to realize, assuming he's following an optimal strategy. Finally, we're going to talk about misconceptions when defending. And in order to fully grasp this particular topic, we're going to also need to recap on some basic principles. Principles such as pot odds, implied odds. We won't necessarily go into huge depth when discussing these. We're going to assume that you already understand how these work. If it's not the case that you understand how to perform basic pot odds calculations, then it's a good idea to check out the video series on poker maths. But we're going to make some assumptions regarding your current state of knowledge when it comes to pot odds and implied odds. You can probably find a pretty straightforward article online somewhere. But we're going to talk about some more advanced mistakes that players make as a result of not fully understanding these basic concepts. So we'll call this particular section misconceptions when defending. And once again, some of this stuff is advanced in the sense that even some good players don't fully understand how they are routinely making mistakes in certain areas of their game. So while the principles we discuss should be considered as basic principles, since they are fundamental to our success as poker players, it's surprising how many good players, quote unquote, are routinely making huge mistakes with some of these fundamental theorems. Don't worry, however, this is exactly what this series is here for. Once you are through with all of the videos in this series, you'll have a very strong fundamental understanding of the principles which govern the play of excellent players. So what can you expect in this series? Hopefully there should be something for everyone here. It's true that we will start off with a thorough explanation of the basics. You don't necessarily need pre-existing knowledge of the principles we've touched on in order to fully benefit from this video. However, this won't be purely a video discussing the basics. We're going to get pretty advanced quite quickly. We're going to begin our exploration of some advanced concepts which stem from these basic poker principles. We're also going to understand many of the mistakes that quote-unquote good players make, and there's a reasonable chance that you fall into this category. The majority of poker players I work with are making mistakes in this area, and some of the students that don't understand the basic fundamental principles regarding playing as the defender, for example, are even playing 100 NL, 200 NL online, and yet they're lacking these crucial principles that are going to accelerate their win rate. So hopefully there should be something for everyone here, regardless of the limits you're playing. Hopefully you can find something in this video series that's going to boost your win rate by a few notches. Alright, thanks very much for taking the time to watch this video. Remember that you can purchase the full series through my site, www.pokerweasel.com, so I look forward to catching you in the series. Alright, thanks very much. This has been Weasel for PokerWeasel.com.